Hello everyone and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso and I'm here with Ajahn Wade, who's been staying here at the monastery. And this is our weekly monk chat, so your opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism and our opportunity to answer them. So you're welcome to type in questions at any time and we'll take questions as we receive them. When we run out of questions, then we will end the stream. So if you want us to keep going, then keep providing questions. And we'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll go through the questions. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha together. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So hello to all the people checking in online. Hello to Rick, Gita, Ryan, Lydia, Karuna, Mary, Meredith, Bhumika, and all the other people who are joining in remotely, and also to the residents here. And we have a question here from Rick. Rick says, Venerables, can you talk about ways to cultivate joy in meditation and a daily life practice? Maybe Ajahn Wade, would you like to say some words on the subject?
Sure, okay. Well, yes, so cultivating joy in meditation, I think, is such a valuable thing. Happiness is listed in the sutras as a condition for piti, meaning rapture or something like this, the thrilling pleasure that we can experience in meditation. And it can be a very wholesome mind state if it's associated with something like meditation. And I think two ways that come to mind initially are practicing loving kindness meditation and practicing recollection of good things that we've done. You might expand that also to the 6 inspiring themes in general: the recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, recollection of our generosity or sacrifices, and recollection of our sila, which would be our precepts, and recollection of devas. These are the 6 inspiring themes. And if you add to that also loving kindness, and so those are suggestions I can offer.
Great, very good. Okay, and that's the only question. So that might be the end of the monk chat for the evening. And this might go on record as the shortest monk chat in history. It's lasted exactly 3 minutes and 10 seconds. So if there's no other questions, also the residents are welcome to ask questions. But if there's no more questions, that might be the end of the monk chat. Let's see. Question. Okay. Ooh. A couple more questions. Okay. That always inspires people. Whenever we threaten to end early, suddenly they're like, uh-oh, gotta type something in. Okay, so NJBK says, Dear Bhante Sudaso, I saw in your bio that you ordained in Thai forest tradition and later moved towards Sri Lankan. I'm curious about your progression and what led you to start BI. Thanks. Well, my interest has always just been in practicing Buddhism. So my interest has always just been in trying to understand what the Buddha taught and how to practice in accordance with the Buddha's teachings so that I can attain awakening. So in the beginning, I was most drawn specifically to Japanese Zen. That was a style of Buddhism which to me seemed very pure and very direct. And I got a lot of benefit. I practiced in that tradition for 5 years, and it helped me tremendously. But at some point, I wanted to practice in a style closer to what was being done during the time of the Buddha. So at that time, then I went to stay at Abhayagiri, which is a monastery in the Thai forest tradition located in California. So it's a Ajahn Chah monastery. And I lived there for several years. That's where I was ordained. And that forms the basic foundation of my approach to monastic life, is what I learned at Abhayagiri, so in the Ajahn Chah branch of the Thai forest tradition. But my goal was never to be a Japanese Zen monk or to be a Thai forest monk, but my interest was always just in being a Buddhist monk. So I was interested in also experiencing other styles of Buddhism, other ways of practicing. So I did spend about 3 years total staying in a couple different Sri Lankan monasteries. And that was also quite interesting. So seeing what was similar and what was different, and how things which I was used to being interpreted in one way were sometimes interpreted in slightly different ways, and that helped to kind of deepen and flesh out my understanding of Theravada Buddhism. So seeing how it's practiced and interpreted a bit differently in different countries and cultures and places. And that's something which I tend to encourage people to do, is not to wed yourself only to one specific narrow piece of Buddhism, but try to expose yourself to a broader perspective. And that tends to give a more thorough understanding of Buddhism. And something that I had observed over the course of many years of Buddhist practice was that in the US in particular, there's not much broad awareness of monasticism, of Buddhist monasticism. There's not much exposure to Buddhist monks. And that was something which I always found a little bit problematic, because it's not something which has ever been the case in Buddhist history. So Buddhist history has always been very monastic centric, very monk centric, very monastery centric. And it's a bizarrity in the history of Buddhism that American Buddhism has developed in such a non-monk centric way. That's something quite unusual in Buddhist history. And it doesn't bode well. It's actually a really big problem. So that was something I'd always had in mind, that it'd be nice to do something to start addressing that if the opportunity presented itself. And the opportunity presented itself in the form of Ioma, who at the time was still a lay person. And she had observed the same problem, but from the other side. So as a lay person trying to access monastic Buddhism, but finding it quite challenging to do so. So then the two of us discussed this shared experience from different perspectives and hatched the idea together to start an organization that would facilitate lay people, especially in the United States, to have access to monastic Buddhism, access to monastic teachers, and the ability to experience traditional Buddhism through the monastic lens a bit more easily. And also to appreciate the value of monasticism as a central component of Buddhism. And that eventually led to starting a retreat center in New York City, which then led to starting a monastery here in New Jersey, and most recently to starting a forest monastery in Italy, which we just initiated about a month ago now. So that's a brief answer without going into a lot of detail. Okay, next question. Norma says, can you talk about working with contentment? Ajahn Wade, can you talk about working with contentment?
Okay, I'll try. So contentment, yes, is contentment, I believe, is called in the suttas, in at least one area of the suttas is called the highest form of wealth. And this is because if you're content, then you're already quite wealthy. If you're satisfied, no matter how much you have, whether it's relationships or material wealth or the career or whatever it may be, if you're not happy and satisfied, then you're still suffering, from this. But if you're content, then even if you don't have many things, if you don't have things other people might envy, for example, then, or if you're not able to acquire the things that you at one time wanted, but if you can develop contentment with what you do have, then it's as though you're wealthy already inside. And so contentment is very valuable. um, so I think one way to develop contentment is to look at the positive aspects and the sufficiency of what you do have. For example, it's possible with your house to always want a bigger house, a nicer house, a house with more luxury items in it, and so on like this. But if you consider how sufficient and how good the house you currently have is, just paying attention to those aspects of it, then you can develop contentment slowly with it and feel much more satisfied with it. So, for example, if you consider, well, does my house or my apartment, whatever dwelling you live in, does it keep the rain out, well enough that I don't get wet? Does it keep, animals out well enough so that I'm not in danger from animals? Does it keep the wind out? And does it keep cold weather out so that I'm safe, from the weather? These kinds of contemplations, thinking about how actually really the dwelling we have is very sufficient. The more we think about this, the more content we'll be with it. And we can do this with other areas of our lives as well, such as our material wealth, our relationships, our career, and so on like this. And then feel quite good inside. That's what I can offer.
That's very good. Yeah. Okay, and Mary says, can you describe the early role of women in the Buddha's time? So that's potentially a very broad topic because there's the culture, which itself was not unified. And talking about the different aspects of early Indian culture could take us quite a lot of time and probably isn't quite what you're asking anyway. But more relevant is what we see in the Buddha's teachings. And one thing that we see stated in many places in the suttas is that one's physical sex is not a factor in one's capacity to attain awakening. So whether you're a man or a woman has no bearing on your ability to cultivate a spiritual path and to attain awakening. And this is a very important thing to keep in mind. It's actually surprising how rarely this is pointed out. But the Buddha himself pointed this out on several occasions. It's also important to note that the Buddha ordained both men and women. So he actually said, right after he attained awakening, the Buddha said that he would not pass away until he had a full community of both male and female monks who had attained awakening. So he needed to have both male monks who were fully awakened and female monks who were fully awakened and who were capable of teaching other men and women the path to awakening. And only then was the Buddha willing to leave this world. And again, he was very specific about this. There had to be both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who were fully awakened and able to teach others the path of awakening. And this was the determination he made the moment he attained awakening. So this was his basic founding principle for Buddhism. So it actually reminds me of opening a nonprofit organization. So when starting a nonprofit organization, one of the things you have to do is you have to make a mission statement, like a basic statement, usually about one paragraph, which sums up, like, what are you trying to do with this organization? So if you're all about soup kitchens in New York City, then your mission statement would be talking about soup kitchens in New York City. If your goal is to distribute textbooks in Zimbabwe, then your mission statement would talk about distributing textbooks in Zimbabwe. Well, the Buddha's mission statement was to ordain both men and women, get both men and women fully enlightened as bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and get them teaching other people how to attain awakening. That was his mission statement for Buddhism. And that's what he did. If we just want to start getting into the specific details, then we'll be here all night. And most of it's kind of beside the point. I think that's the really important thing to point out. Okay, and then Julie says, I'm looking forward to visiting soon. I was wondering, is Ioma in Italy for the rains? Yes, she is. And Julie says, looks like I will be missing the opportunity to see her again. No, you can just go to Italy. Bring a tent, because currently that's what your lodgings are going to be. If you go to the monastery in Italy, calling it a monastery is a bit of a joke because it's actually no, it's a monastery very much like in early Buddhism, which means there's a bunch of trees and some monks sitting under the trees. So you can go and visit her in Italy, and I'm sure she'll be happy to see you.
Bhante, is she also occasionally doing live streams from Italy?
In the past, yes. I don't know about currently.
Okay.
There's no Wi-Fi at the monastery,
The
not
trees
monastery. Yeah, fortunately. Okay, Ryan says, what is a good mantra when doing metta meditation? One that I found really helpful is just to think, may everyone be happy. So it's very short, it's very simple, and you just repeat that a few times. And a few times might mean for an hour or so. And really try to build up the corresponding mind state. So may everyone be happy, may everyone be happy, may everyone be happy, and really try to mean it. Yeah, I've had great success with that one. Sometimes I just use the word metta, just metta, 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 and sometimes that's enough. Do you have any others that you like to use?
Those are good, and there are variations on that one. May everyone be happy, or it's just thinking of loving kindness, thinking of the quality of love to generate that in the heart. You know? And so whatever variation works for you, you know. I didn't see the name of the person. Is that Ryan?
Yeah.
Ryan. Whatever works for you, Ryan. And so variations on this. It's you know, something. May everyone be happy. May everyone be free of affliction. These kinds of things. And so is kind of an art, seeing what works for you, and it may change over time. One way I practiced is in the early days was actually reciting loving kindness related suttas.
Mm.
So the Buddha's words on loving kindness, the Karanita Metta Sutta, or the geez, I don't know what the name of the sutta is and what the sutta reference is. We have in the Forest Sangha chanting book the Reflection on Universal Well-Being. We go through all four of the Brahma Viharas, quite beautiful. And so that's a much different kind of answer, because they're not actually what you call a mantra, but they're chants of substantial length. So if you want to see a different way of practicing that, that's one I could suggest. If you look up the Forest Sangha chanting book online, they have these kinds of chants in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Richard says, I have clinical depression with anxiety that cause be negative. Be afraid of people, have panic, thinking others will laugh or criticize me. Could you help me, please? So I recommend that you start regularly seeing a psychotherapist, ideally one who specializes in anxiety. So one thing that's important to understand is that Buddhist practice is not necessarily a substitute for psychotherapy. And sometimes if somebody's issues are quite mild, then sometimes Buddhist practice is sufficient. But if the psychological issues are a bit more challenging, then usually it's better to have the help of a therapist, because that's what they specialize in, and that's what they do. Ideally, you could find a Buddhist psychotherapist. They do exist. There's not a whole lot of them depending on where you are in the world. So here in the US, where Buddhists are only about 1 or 2% of the population, that then means that it's probably only about 1 or 2% of the psychotherapists. So there are some, but they can be a little challenging to track down. Yeah, ideally get a Buddhist psychotherapist, but realistically, Any kind of psychotherapist who specializes in anxiety is probably the best help for you here. So you can still practice Buddhism and also see a psychotherapist. They're not mutually exclusive, but don't try to replace one with the other. That's usually not such a good idea. Yeah.
I have a question. So this is like maybe like I guess you can relate to this on a personal level, but if you unintentionally hurt someone, and then you see it as a small, like you see it as smaller, but they see it as a bit larger than how you see it, and then you already apologize, but then they give you the silent treatment. What do you do?
Nothing, because that person is making their own choices. So if you've already apologized and tried to make amends and the other person isn't accepting it, well, then that's their problem, not yours. So often the best thing to do is if they want some space, give them some space. And maybe in a month or a year, maybe they'll change their attitude towards you, and maybe they won't. And either way, that's okay. So it's important to be willing to let go of absolutely anyone.
Yeah, I know it's ironic. This is the practice, but it's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
Attachment.
Yeah, Buddhism is not easy.
It's not.
No.
It's a lot of suffering.
So suffering is always self-generated. So the suffering here is that you want to have a particular relationship with that person. But the problem is that relationships always require two people to be on the same page. So if you want a particular relationship and the other person doesn't want that kind of relationship, then it doesn't happen. So you cannot control other people. So if your happiness is dependent upon the actions of other people, then you will never be happy. There's only one person whose actions you can control, and that's hard enough, which is your own actions. So that's already enough of a challenge. Don't add the impossible on top of that. So do actions that you yourself are proud of, that you yourself think are praiseworthy and wise, and be content with that. And when other people in your life do things that you think are not so great, that's their problem. It's not yours. You can reflect, I'm doing my best I can to be a good person, and I can't control other people. So,
because I think sometimes when things happen, you feel guilty because of the person's reaction, and maybe it's like you try to downplay it, but for them it's different, their perception. So you feel like the bad guy.
well, I mean, it's also good to consider the other person's perspective. It's like, well, is it possible that actually I did do something that was really offensive or really hurtful? And maybe that wasn't your intention, but that was the effect.
Right.
So you're still blameless in that you didn't have the harmful intention. But it's also important to understand the real consequences of our choices so that we can make better informed decisions in the future. But right now, there may not be anything you can do to fix this situation. And that's just how it is sometimes. So in that case, if you've already tried to apologize and make amends and the other person's not accepting it, then that's the end of this chapter. And there might be another chapter at some point in the future, but for now, it's probably better just to put it down and enjoy solitude or enjoy the other people who aren't currently mad at you. And maybe in the future things will change and maybe they won't. And we need to be content with either way. Okay? Okay, and Rick has another question here for Ajahn Wade. Says, can you share some reflections on the benefits of helping others while our hearts are filled with loving kindness? In 12-step recovery, showing up in love and service is a vital spiritual practice.
Well, sure. The benefits of helping others while our hearts are filled with loving kindness was, even just hearing about it sounds inspiring. It's such a such a wholesome idea. You know, helping others, even in the simplest ways, even if we don't have a heart filled with loving kindness, is very meritorious, and so many of us know what it's like to be on the receiving end of that when someone helps us, how beneficial it can be, and how special that can be. And so, even if the heart of the other person isn't necessarily filled with loving kindness, even if it's just in an offhand way, it can be so beneficial to us. And it's one aspect of it. But when someone really cares about us, really wants us to be well and wants us to be happy, then that's even more special. If we stop and think about it, how many people in life really genuinely care about us, about other people, and so on. If we stop and reflect on that, we realize it actually is quite a special quality. It's not something to be taken for granted. In the suttas, it talks about the merit of these kinds of things. It says that, for example, if you make an act of generosity, say you give a gift, for example, to an animal, it will come back to you 100 times over. And if you give something to a human being, it will come back to you 1,000 times over. And if you give something to a virtuous human being, it will come back to you 10,000 times over. And it goes up and up from there. But as you can see, that in terms of merit, that this is very powerful. And the Buddha went on to say that it is, or in a different section of the sutras, in a different section of the sutras, he was comparing the merit of loving kindness and generosity. And he said that generosity is very good merit, but even if you gave away, millions in gold and silver over the course of a year, it wouldn't match the merit of undertaking the 5 precepts and keeping the 5 precepts. But even as good a merit as that is practicing loving kindness for as long as it takes to milk a cow is even greater merit. And to put this in perspective, the Buddha, he said already about how much merit is in giving. So if you compare, that means loving kindness is a tremendously powerful force for good, really, in the world. And still in another section of the suttas, the Buddha is talking about mind states we can have when we're giving. And he says, he goes through a variety of different kinds of mental states you can have. You might be even just giving with the hope that somebody will give you something even better in return later on. This is one way of giving. But if you're giving with love, with the thought that you might be reborn in a heaven realm, for example, or be reborn wealthy, then this is possible, he said, due to the power of this merit. But then he went on to say that if you give with a mind of loving kindness, and this is even higher than those kinds of mind states when giving. I'd like to note, though, he says that the very highest kind of mental state to have when giving is to think that when giving that this will beautify the mind and make your mind more beautiful. Excuse me, beautify the mind and make it more noble. And make it more noble. And so I think this is something else you can sort of add in, or you can contemplate as well when developing loving kindness and making a gift, making an offering or something like this. Also consider this, that you're developing yourself spiritually as well, and that'll elevate it even higher. So, some considerations.
Sadhu. Okay, let's see some more questions here. So Yongchu asks, do devas go through sickness, old age, and death as in humans? Sickness, no. So even the lowest of devas are exempt from sickness. Old age, not really. They're basically young for their entire lifespan. Death, yes. Like everything else, devas eventually die. So they don't experience some of the more coarse forms of suffering that we experience. So devas don't experience sickness, they don't experience hunger and thirst, they don't experience heat and cold. There's no mosquitoes. So they're exempt from some of the basic kinds of torment that humans have. But they still have dukkha. So devas still experience desire and aversion, and they don't always get what they want. There's actually this one cute sutta about a deva who has a crush on another deva. And the problem is that the other deva is not particularly interested. So it's actually a deva lamenting about his unrequited love, which is actually remarkably human. It's quite easy to relate to. So even though devas live comparatively quite easy lives compared to humans, they still experience the suffering of a defiled mind, the suffering of greed, hatred, and delusion. So, and of course, they do eventually die. And when they're reborn, well, let's just say when you're already at the top, there's only one direction you go, and that's down. So unless devas have been actively trying to cultivate more good karma while they're devas, then they're likely to be reborn somewhere less pleasant. So still not so great. So in Buddhism, we don't usually advise trying to be reborn as devas because it doesn't actually solve anything in the long run. Instead, we encourage practicing for awakening because that actually is a long-term solution to suffering. Okay, and Rick says, as lay practitioners, how do we know if we are on track in our deeper meditation if we don't have a local teacher? What do you think?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, teachers are so valuable, and I think maybe you should invite some monks to go stay there and start a monastery.
Or at least come for visits every now and then.
That's great. Yes, right. Come and visit. Some things you can look at when you're meditating is your mind becoming calmer. It's a very, very simple thing. Even if your meditation seems quite busy, mentally, which can happen. I've certainly experienced that myself at times, and if at the end of it, if when you're done meditating, if you stop and notice, do you feel as though you're calmer than you were when you started? Then this is a very good sign. And if you're a little bit more mindful, a little clearer. If you're practicing loving kindness meditation, does it raise your spirits a little, at least a little bit? And are you able to develop a little bit of that feeling of caring, of goodwill towards yourself or towards other living beings? These are a couple of ideas to look for. But yeah, so it'd be wonderful if you could travel and visit someone or visit a teacher, and to really get some more in-depth kind of advice. If you have any ideas, Bhante, in addition.
Yeah, I mean, well, as I said before, you can invite monks to come. So generally speaking, if you're willing to arrange for their transportation, then it's not that hard to find a monk who will come and share some Dhamma in your area. There's a lot of monks I know who actually quite like to travel around and teach in different parts of the world. As long as somebody's willing to get them a flight or a train or whatever, they'll usually go. Okay, and Mike says, Bhante Sudaso, I took your advice from last Sunday and removed all social media apps from my phone and deleted accounts where possible.
Wow.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Wow, very good. Okay. I always love it when people actually take my advice. I mean, there's usually reasons for why I say what I say. Okay, very good. Okay, Mike, you've impressed me. And Mike says, I've noticed there are moments where I will subconsciously try to access those apps or websites, even though I no longer have them available. This leaves a fairly awkward void. Should I attempt to fill this void? Yes, you should. Recommended ways to fill the void include sutta study, chanting, and meditation. These are great things to do. When you feel that desperate urge to do something, do one of these three things. So what you're experiencing is addiction withdrawal. One of the aspects of addiction withdrawal is cravings and a sense of hollowness, a sense of lack. It goes away in time. If you don't give in to the cravings, then they get weaker. If you do wholesome things instead, then you'll start generating wholesome habits to replace the unwholesome habits that you're trying to break.
Can
Yeah.
I say something? So it's been like a year since I'm off of social media, and
Great.
just maybe advice for Mike. Once you initially delete it, you will have a tendency to like just download it just to see it, and then but the trick is to delete it right away. Like do not sign in, and then keep doing that, and eventually it'll be silly. It's like you're just downloading it just to see the app. That worked for me, but
Great.
yeah, there are times where it does creep up on you, and then after like that threshold, you won't want it ever again.
So Mike, I'm not sure if you heard that, but our resident here is recommending if you catch yourself downloading the app again, delete it immediately. Don't even open it or sign in or anything, just delete it immediately.
And then I'll become like annoying just downloading it, so help me.
Okay, and Norma asks, is the volume lower than usual tonight? I don't think the volume is lower than usual, but I think my voice is lower than usual because I've had a sore throat for some time now. And Ajahn Wade just talks a bit on the quiet side normally, I think. So turn your volume up on your end if you can.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you can practice, like I can practice gratitude and respecting those around me?
Gratitude, remember any good thing somebody else has done for you. Even just something simple like a good example, like they did something praiseworthy in your presence. Even something as simple as like, oh, that person was walking very quietly. Oh, I'm so grateful that they demonstrated to me quiet walking. That's delightful. But especially anytime somebody does something particularly kind or praiseworthy. So, for example, the other day, some of the residents here did a 4-hour period of sitting meditation. So you can be, oh, I'm so grateful that they gave a good example, demonstrating that this is something which is possible. You don't even need to be a monk. Even lay people can do crazy things like that.
I actually did that before you left today, like the day you were leaving.
Yeah, I remember you
did
told
it
me.
2 times.
Yeah. Yeah, so actively look for good things or praiseworthy things that other people have done so you can be grateful. Actually, gratitude is a delightful practice to do. It brings a lot of joy to the mind. And also it naturally supports the practice of loving kindness. When you have gratitude, then the mind is close to metta.
What if you don't like the person?
Well, then think about other people. That usually helps. You don't start with what's hard. If you don't like someone, then of course it's going to be hard to have positive attitudes toward them. So start with other people that you already like or that you already have a positive attitude towards. Start with them. And as you build up these wholesome mind states, then it gets easier to have those wholesome attitudes towards more difficult people as well. But you start with what's easy. Don't start with what's hard.
Okay, start with what's easy.
Okay, so Giancarlo says, any thoughts or resources on renunciation for lay people? How much to do proactively versus naturally fall away with practice? What do you think?
Well, see, 2 ideas come to mind immediately. Well, 3, deleting the social media apps from your phones. I'm so unfamiliar with social media apps. I'm not, but I take everyone's word for it. It sounds like it's a good thing to remove them from your phone. So there's one, renouncing social media, I guess, unless you find it's really useful for what you do, and if it makes your life more complicated to delete the apps. But it sounds like a lot of people are in favor of deleting social media apps these days from their phones. So I'd recommend that. But some other ideas also. So in the suttas, the Buddha recommended for lay people as an integral part of the lay path to do a religious observance day each week. So what's called in the suttas the Uposita day. And this entails following the 8 precepts and devoting the day to spiritual practice. And the 8 precepts include some what you might call renunciation precepts. So they're the abstaining from killing, from stealing, abstaining from all sexual interactions, abstaining from lying, abstaining from intoxicants, abstaining from eating past midday, abstaining from entertainment and beautification, entertainment and self-beautification, and abstaining from high and luxurious sleeping or sitting places. So you might even sleep right on the floor on a thin mat, something like this. And so you can see there's quite a bit of renunciation in there, and it's something that, according to the suttas, the Buddha said that all lay people should do as an integral part of their spiritual practice each week, and practice meditation and stuff like this. And it's quite common on those days to go into the monastery if there's a monastery near you. And for example, here at Empty Cloud on Sundays, we have a program that lasts all day. It's very suitable for following this kind of a practice. Another idea, this is actually much simpler, is that for some reason I suddenly remembered that one of the ascetic practices, there's a set of ascetic practices in the Theravadan tradition, many or all of which are mentioned specifically in the suttas, or at least in the code of conduct for monks. And according to tradition, one of them is very suitable for lay people, and that's eating all of your food out of one vessel when you eat. And so you don't necessarily have to do this when you go out to a restaurant or something like this, but when in suitable situations, when you're eating food, to put all the food you're going to eat into one bowl or onto one plate or something like this, and not have things all separated out. And this is, according to tradition, a way to renounce flavors and tastes and so on like this, and that style of eating. So that's another suggestion I could offer.
Great. And Diane says, did the Buddha teach metta meditation? I hear a lot about it, but have not yet come across it in the suttas. Well, Diane, keep reading the suttas. Because, in fact, as you read through the suttas, you will see that metta meditation is mentioned hundreds and hundreds of times, literally, hundreds and hundreds of times in the suttas. It's extremely common in the suttas. It's actually one of the meditation methods that the Buddha talks about the most. He talks more about metta than he does about mindfulness of breathing. So people think that breath meditation is the basic Buddhist meditation, but actually the Buddha talks about metta more than he talks about breath meditation. So keep reading suttas and you'll find it's all over the place. Yes, absolutely the Buddha taught metta meditation. And it's a very important part of our practice. Yeah.
If you're talking to somebody about a certain topic and they disagree and they start yelling, and they might have like some temper, what do you do? Like, do you keep talking softly or do you stay quiet? Do you avoid? Do you walk away? What do you recommend doing?
Well, it's very circumstantial. So for those online, our resident is asking what to do when talking with someone and the other person is disagreeing and speaking in a loud or aggressive way. Often the best thing to do is to just be like, okay, and either change the subject or leave. Like if someone's not willing to have a polite, civil conversation, then don't waste your time. Yeah, personally, I wouldn't waste my time. It's just like, okay, if that's what you want to think, that's fine. I wouldn't even say that. It's just like, okay. It's actually really incredible how much that shuts people down when they're like, ah, da, 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 and you're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of efficient.
Just peaceful, quiet smile. It's like, okay.
What if the reason they act like that is because they had like past, trauma or such?
You're not here to fix other people. That's up to their therapist to do. So don't try to be somebody's therapist unless you actually are their therapist. The world is full of broken people, and of course it's nice to try to fix them, but we need to be realistic about what we can actually do. And in a situation like that, probably continuing the conversation is not going to help either them or you. Yeah, I mean, honestly, in the past, when people have spoken in that manner to me, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I guess this person is not part of my life anymore. Great, cross that one off the list. My life just got a little bit simpler. Yeah, one of the things the Buddha said, which I find really straightforward, is in the Kagavasana Suttas, the discourses on the rhinoceros horn. The Buddha says, if you cannot find a companion who is at least as wise as you, then it is better to be alone. There is no companionship with fools. So that line from the Buddha, there is no companionship with fools. Period. Don't waste your time with those kinds of people. If they want to talk to you, then they can talk to you in a polite way and listen to your opinion. If they don't want to talk to you in a polite way, then they're not part of your life. End of story. You don't need to be a doormat. Okay? Buddhism is not doormatism. That's not what we do. Okay, Jay Morgan says, is watching Dhamma talks okay to fill the void? Yes, within reason. I mean, generally speaking, yes. But if you find yourself like literally just doing it to kill time, well, still it's actually relatively okay, because at least you're just filling the mind with Dhamma. It's actually pretty hard to find fault with that. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Is it okay to just fill the void with Dhamma talks?
Yes. So, yes, I'd like to. Yes, so yeah, it's better than a lot of other things you could fill the void with. I wonder if this is in response to the question about deleting social media
Yeah,
apps
I
from
think
the
so.
phone. Okay.
Yeah.
And so asked what do we do with our time? You suggested reading suttas, as I recall, meditating, chanting, and yeah, and so listening to Dhamma talks, assuming they're good Dhamma talks, it's like reading the sutta, so it's a similar kind of idea. Some people also like to be very active, and so if you practice giving, for example, that's also another kind of idea you can put in there too. But yeah, so I think it's good.
Okay. And Dreamy Pisces says, have you ever heard about hemispheric synchronization or brainwave synchronization? They are saying it is as good as 10 years of meditation practice. What's your thoughts on this? My thoughts are that the only thing that's as good as 10 years of meditation practice is 10 years of meditation practice. There's no substitute. The other thing is, I'm always curious when, especially secular sources are talking about something being as good as meditation, is I'm wondering, what do they think meditation is for? Like, if you think meditation is for calming down your mind, well, Xanax is also really good at calming down your mind. Pharmaceuticals can alter your brain chemistry in all kinds of ways. So if you think meditation is about altering your brain chemistry, well, there are lots of things which will get much quicker results than meditation. But Buddhist practice is not about altering your brain chemistry or synchronizing your brain waves or anything like that. Buddhism has a much deeper and more profound scope, which involves, among other things, it involves completely changing our habits of thinking and reacting. And I don't think that brainwave synchronization is going to fundamentally change your deep set habits. Actually, to be honest, if brainwave synchronization was the path to full awakening, I think the Buddha would have talked about it. That's another thing. So I haven't come across the brainwave synchronization sutta yet, so I'm pretty sure it wasn't part of his teachings. Have you heard of brainwave synchronization? Do you know anything about this?
No, I don't know what it is.
Okay. Okay. And Rick has another question. He says, are there monasteries in the USA that allow visits from people with life-altering illnesses or disabilities? My chronic illness has gotten worse, impairing my ability to function normally. So Rick, it always depends on the monastery, and it always depends upon the circumstances and the particular person. So one of the delightful things about Buddhism is that Buddhism is a disorganized religion, which means there are not universal policies that apply to every monastery everywhere. In fact, the system the Buddha created is that every monastery is independent and makes decisions independently of other monasteries. So if you want to visit a monastery, contact them, tell them what your current condition is, and ask them if that's acceptable. And you'll find that some monasteries will say yes and some will say no. And that's just the way things are. Yeah.
I'll follow up to that. I've heard this term wandering monk.
Yep.
And if you could, if the idea the Buddha gave was how important communal togetherness is, I wonder what is the wandering monk's mission or.
So a resident is asking about wandering monks, particularly since the Buddha emphasized the value of communal harmony and of having good spiritual companions. So the Buddha himself was a wandering monk. He spent most of his life wandering around, rarely alone. Most of the time, he was traveling with other bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, most of the time. And wandering practice is, sometimes it's a solo activity, but most of the time we walk as a group. Most commonly 2 or 3 monks together, sometimes a larger group. And one of the things the Buddha emphasized is the importance of choosing your companions carefully. You want companions which will support your practice and not hinder it. Wandering has, since the very beginning of Buddhism, the wandering monk practice has always been an important element of Buddhism. But that doesn't necessarily mean solitary practice. In fact, it's usually done as a group. So I did recently do a week of solo wandering, and that was interesting. It was a good experience. But most of the time I go with 1 or 2 other monks. Sometimes 3 or 4, but I like to go as a group of 2 or 3 in total. Yeah.
So if you were to attain like Sodapana, and that's 7 lives, what indicates that you're going to heaven or the human realm? Like, is there like a set? Is there a certain pattern, or how does that work?
You don't need to worry about it at that point.
Okay.
Because the important thing is that when you're a stream enterer, you're guaranteed to attain awakening within a few lifetimes. Doesn't matter.
So even if you're a human, there's not going to be influence because you're already on this without.
You'll have influences, but they won't knock you off the path.
Okay.
So once somebody attains stream entry, then they're completely focused on awakening, and they'll keep moving towards awakening.
Okay.
So whether you're born as a human or as a deva, you'll be focused on awakening. So you don't need to worry about the details at that point, because your goal is locked in, and you're going to keep moving towards that goal.
And you're aware that you're on the path.
Yeah. Yeah, stream enterers know that they're stream enterers with absolute certainty.
Okay.
There's no doubt in the mind. So stream enterers can still make minor mistakes, but they won't do anything really bad. Okay?
Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you, in Buddhism, like what she was saying, like communal harmony is really important. How can I apply, how can I learn to live in communal harmony with my family and learn to apply those skills in life? Yeah.
It's always harder with family. Start with strangers. Actually, staying in monasteries helps tremendously. Staying in monasteries, you will start to learn how to be patient and kind with strangers. And then when you're home with your family, you'll have already developed those skills, and it will be a little bit easier. It will still be really, really, really hard, but it will be a little bit easier. Yeah, patience, kindness, tolerance. When they're doing those annoying things that annoy you so much and have annoyed you for the past 20 years, take a deep breath, Don't take it personally. Establish loving kindness, and then do something nice for them. One of the best ways to change negative patterns with anyone, but especially with family members, is through random acts of kindness and generosity.
I have the thought of like doing kind things, but then does it come out?
Well, the thought is great. So the thought is the first step. So it's good that you have the thought. Now the next thing is to do it.
Yeah.
So thoughts are the precursor to speech and actions, but you need to then put those thoughts into speech and action. So it's good you have the thought. Now put the effort to making it real.
Then I tell myself like I'll push it back into another day or like into the future.
Yeah. Yep. You can procrastinate right until you die. Yep. Yep. So next time you see your mom, do something nice for her. Okay? Okay, Bhavani says, how is Ioma? She's great. She is absolutely loving sitting in the forest doing nothing. In fact, I envy her. I also was loving sitting in the forest doing nothing up until a week ago. Bhavani says, how is her monastery in Italy? It's great if by monastery, once again, you mean a bunch of trees with, there's also some ruined buildings, but they're basically unusable for the time being. A bunch of trees, there's a cave, there's a nice cave, I like the cave. Bhavani also asked, do they have a cat there also? Not yet, but there are stray cats in that area, and I suspect eventually some will wander into the monastery grounds. The monastery grounds does have foxes. We've seen foxes there. They don't seem much interested in us, but we have seen them. Supposedly there's wild boar. I haven't actually seen them though. Yeah, but no cats so far. I suspect eventually there will be wild cats, or stray cats and stray dogs wandering in, because that tends to happen in forest monasteries. Okay, Rick says, I do not have a smartphone, just a flip phone. Sadhu, 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 wow. Rick, people like you are rare these days. Rick says, I have never participated in social media sites, but I accidentally created a Facebook account. Accidentally? He continues, so I can connect with a couple Dhamma sites. Okay, that's a suitable reason. Says, many times friends and family members have been hurt that I won't accept friend requests. Any reflections? Just be totally honest with them. Tell them I have this account specifically for accessing some specific sites, and that's the only reason I have it, and I'm not doing anything else with it. Because you can just tell them, because these things are very addictive and they can easily lead into wasting a lot of time. And tell your family and friends that you really value your connection with them and you really want to communicate with them, just not through Facebook. They are happy to communicate with them using any other medium that you're already using, but not through Facebook. You can even tell him that the Buddhist monks told you not to. So you can pull the religious zealot card on this one, like the monk told me not to. And that's also totally fine.
I have a question like that with social media.
Go ahead.
So like with social media, you can connect with like your old friends and like kind of check in on them. So like, what about that? And like you can learn things too. Like for example.
God, we just are so good at making excuses, aren't we?
No, like seriously, like from using Instagram, I learned that there's like a retreat center in Italy. So like in the future, I would like to go visit Empty Cloud Italia, and then like I can also visit that retreat center. So what about like situations like that? You get to learn like different things, and also like the monastery uses social media to advertise.
So what I hear is a string of excuses to justify bad behavior. That's what I'm hearing. Just put it down. Put it down for a week and just see how your life changes. Okay? 1 week. Okay. And Scott says, has the practice, in your opinion, helped broken people? Yes, absolutely. I have become slightly less broken through the help of Buddhist practice. So I can vouch for at least one broken person who has become slightly less broken. How about you?
Yeah, I'm still pretty broken, but less broken. I can, yeah, so
Okay.
some experience.
Also less
But,
broken.
first of all, depends what you compare it to. But
I mean, honestly, I just think what I was like 20 years ago,
yes, right.
or actually longer. I've been practicing Buddhism longer than that. I think what I was like before I started practicing Buddhism, and I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
I was way worse.
Yeah.
So, am I perfect yet? No, but I'm a lot better than I used to be.
I'm much better. You don't even have to, I don't even have to think back. Excuse me. I don't even have to think back 20 years. Just think about 10 years ago before I ordained. How big of a difference it's made in my life. So, I wonder about. I wonder if this gentleman is asking about people who have experienced trauma and so on like this. We heard that term earlier in the evening. The people who are broken. I think it was a reference to people who experienced actually like trauma and so on like this. And, do you know anyone who's been helped by? I wonder. I don't know much about people's experience. People who've had serious trauma, for example, or other mental illness with Dhamma practice and how beneficial it's been for them.
I mean, I'm not an expert in that. I do know of, again, a number of Buddhist psychotherapists who have successfully incorporated Dhamma into their psychotherapy work, and report that it really greatly improved the success rate of some of their clients.
Excellent.
I mean, one thing I did observe was a young lady whose husband had died young. I think he was in his late 20s, early 30s, so it was on the young side for someone to suddenly die. And she came and stayed at the monastery for 3 months. And so she started her residency right after her husband died, and she was just a complete mess all the time, as can be expected.
Yeah.
Young person suddenly loses her husband. Of course, she's going to be a bit of a wreck. But after 3 months, she was like bright and shiny and happy and cheerful, and she was talking. She attributed it to staying at the monastery.
Wow.
That it was her time at the monastery that really helped her rapidly process her grief and very quickly emerge into a state of joy.
Wow, fantastic.
So that was very tangible because I saw with my own eyes the change in her in just a short period of time.
Another tangible spirit maybe that they would like to look into is the benefits. I forget which prison they incorporated meditation to, and there was a huge change in the folks that were there.
Mm-mm. Yeah, so one of the residents here also is pointing out that there's been studies on Buddhist meditation and helping prisoners, which have also been quite successful. So you could also look into that. Okay, and we have something else?
I just thought of something else actually. Yeah, pardon me, Bhante. Bhante Sanata Vihari, who was in residence here recently, he a couple of times he recommended a book for people who had experienced trauma. That was written by a medical doctor who's now a bhikkhuni, or she's a monastic in the Thich Nhat Hanh lineage of monasteries, and here in the United States. And I don't remember her name, but I remember the name of the book was Flowers in the Dark. That's what we actually have it on our bookshelf over here.
That's a great title.
Yeah. So perhaps that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. And Jay Morgan also says, I'm slightly less broken after a year of practice. Great, may it continue to go in that direction. Joseph is asking, can we do a talk on Anguttara Nikaya 3.95? So Joseph, feel free to send sutta requests to the monastery email. And this is not just for Joseph, but for everyone. You're always welcome to request specific suttas for the Dhamma talks, and if it's practical, then we will most likely do it at some point. So Joseph, feel free to send that request in by email. And let's see if there's any other questions here. That looks like the end of the questions. Rick clarifies his accidentally joining Facebook story. He says, I was trying to download pictures of the meditation hall and grounds of a meditation center. The site told me I had to create an account to download the pictures. I thought I was creating an account with the meditation center, but it turned out to be a Facebook account. Yeah, technology is deceptive. Yep, and it is full of little traps for the unwary. Also for the wary. Okay, so that looks like the end of the monk chat for the evening. So thank you all for these delightful questions, and hopefully we'll see you again next time. So we'll conclude with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.